Great. Well, thank you, and welcome everybody out to our October issue of On Track Live here. Thanks for those of you who are chiming in live today. We moved our regularly scheduled webinar to a couple hours later because that's what it took to get our special guest, and I'm really excited to have him. And just as a reminder to everyone that these sessions are recorded, so if you ever can't make it at the regular time, you can certainly go back and review it at your leisure. So that probably accounts why we've got a little smaller group today, but I suspect a lot of those folks will be chiming in later to catch up with us. As we usually do, I'll just hit a couple of news updates from transportation land here, and then get right into the discussion with our featured speaker. First of all, just to answer the questions that everybody's asking now, no, we don't have any details about the coal train derailment in Pueblo, Colorado that you probably haven't already seen in a newspaper thing. Very tragic circumstance. NTSB is on the scene. The preliminary guesstimate is that it was a broken rail that caused the BNSF coal train to derail on a highway bridge right over I-25. The freeway has been closed since Sunday afternoon. They're hoping to get it back open today. Unfortunately, when that bridge collapsed, it did result in the fatality of a truck driver who was under the bridge at the time. Obviously, a huge tragedy. But NTSB is on the scene. The cleanup should be finishing up today, and we'll have all the most recent news in the on-track issue that's coming out tomorrow. But still no word on exactly what that means as far as network impacts on BNSF's network. So stay tuned for more details there. I also wanted to flag everybody's attention. As you know, Surface Transportation Board issued its proposal for a reciprocal switching proposal. This is a long-awaited rulemaking. It's been going on at the STB since like 2004 in various forms. They finally came out with a proposed rule and surprised everybody with what they did. Those of you who were with us in Colorado Springs a few weeks ago heard STB member Karen Hedlund talk about it. Instead of basing the proposal on economic terms, they've shifted it now to a proposal to allow reciprocal switching based on service deficiencies, which all the folks who were asking for this rulemaking said, well, gee, thank you for doing something, but the jury's still out on whether what they did is something that's going to help. This has never been one of the rulemakings that was going to be terribly helpful to the coal sector. You know, the movements on coal are such that, you know, reciprocal switching was probably not going to play a big role, even if the terms were based on economics. The way this one's written, everything keys off of access to interchanges that coal shippers really don't use. So, well, it used to not be as impactful for coal shippers. It's this proposal from the STB is even less than impactful now. Again, watch your emailed On Track comes out tomorrow. We've got a couple of really good articles in there by the likes of Jim Blaze, Frank Wilner, and Frank Hunke, and some of the you know, the guys who know the most about this business, given their opinions on this rulemaking, and it makes for some fascinating reading. So I'd encourage you to do that. The other thing we'll have in the printed On Track tomorrow is NCTA's most recent on-time performance survey results are in. NCTA President Emily Regas presented those at our fall conference in Colorado Springs. We'll have a rundown on that and a link so you can access the full results tomorrow. Emily has also given a presentation on that to a national coal ash workshop that took place last week in Myrtle Beach. And Emily's not with us today because as we speak, they're meeting with the Surface Transportation Board's Rail Energy Transportation Advisory Committee. The RETAC meeting is going on as we speak, and the NCTA performance survey results are part of the discussion there in Washington today. So been a very busy time. The net takeaway from the survey is that rail service has improved significantly, continues to appear to be improving. What's not clear is whether those improvements are the result of better operations on the part of the railroads, or whether it's just the fact that the coal burn has been down and competition from other freight commodities on the rails has been down over the same period of time. So while we are getting better service now, I think it's still an open question as to whether the railroads are going to be in a better position to weather the next shock that comes along, depending on what that is. So again, watch your printed on track tomorrow for some of that information. Finally, just a little shameless self-promotion. Just let you know, next month in November, we'll go back to our regular time at 11:30 Mountain on November 15th. Our guest next week or next month is going to be Frank Wilner. Any of you who read Railway Age know his stuff. Frank has I feel like a real talk show host now, because I can hold up a book and say, how do I do this? So it shows up. Frank has written a book now, put it right by my face. Railroads and Economic Regulation and Insider's Account. I'm about a third of the way through it. Amazing book. We'll have Frank on with us next month to discuss that. In December, we will have Richard Edelman, who's with Mooney Green and some other names. He's a prominent rail and labor attorney for a discussion about how things are going in the labor space on rail. And in January, we'll have back Pete Full from Slover and Loftus, who's going to help us wrap our heads around the railroad common carrier obligation, which is kind of the central moving part on a lot of the things that are happening at STB and also in Congress now. So we've got a full slate of special guests for the next quarter lined up for you. And that's enough of hearing me yak. We can get to our special guest now. I'm really pleased that Bruce Mehlman has agreed to take time out of his busy schedule to spend some time with us today. Bruce is, in my opinion, one of the savviest observers of stuff that goes on in Washington, not just for the politics aspect of it, but also how that politics plays into industries have to make. Very informative. We always link to that slide deck in the on track, and we always link to that slide deck in the on track, and you can get it there. If you've missed the last one, you'd like it, shoot me an email, wardo@wardo.com. I can send you his most recent slide deck. Actually, I'll send you my favorite collection of Mehlman's greatest hits. I've got 3 or 4 that I've collected over the years that I go back to on a frequent basis. So Bruce, thank you so much for taking time to be with us today. Your most recent deck is titled Possibilities and Probabilities. And looking forward into the 24 election cycle that's happening here now. And I'm just going to open with the question that everybody keeps asking me, which is, are we really going to see a Trump-Biden rematch?
Well, first, John, I appreciate the invitation to be on. Apologies for both requesting a time that fit for my given some commitments I'd already made. So I'm sorry to take things off the normal track, as well as I haven't written a book. I'd like to write a book. It's on the bucket list, but I don't have anything for you to hold up other than slides, and nobody likes slides. Although, as you know, I try to make mine a little bit less painful than most. Also, I'm grateful that you have and maintain a greatest hits collection. My mom does not. I'm not sure if that means I owe you thanks or a restraining order, but I'll start with a thanks. My head says we're going to get the least sought after sequel since Caddyshack 2. Nobody wants a Trump versus Biden rematch, and yet we sure seem like we're heading to a Trump-Biden rematch. There are possible exit ramps. So, you could, if you didn't want Trump, let's say, what might happen to deny Trump the nomination? Well, first, in theory, every other Republican could get out except, let's say, Nikki Haley, who I think has proven to be the most effective alternative. Mano a mano, would Trump win? Probably, but that would be a pretty good fight. She's a pretty talented political athlete, but it's also not going to happen. DeSantis ain't getting out. Ramaswamy's running for VP. And so for a variety of reasons, you're not going to have that one-to-one. In theory, you might, he's a 77-year-old overweight man. So actuarially, there's a potential exit ramp, but, COVID didn't take the guy down. He seems indestructible in a lot of ways. And then third, it's while he sort of is opposition research proof, there can't be anything that's disclosed that hasn't already been a fact in the case against him or for him. And there's nothing left. He theoretically could be both convicted and even incarcerated before the election. So I don't think he could be before the time of nomination, though. So I think he's the nominee. On the Dem side, President Biden is, I hope I am as physically fit as he appears to be when I'm 81, but, he doesn't always do so well with a microphone in front of him at giving the sense of kind of crisp, vital vigor. So health is a possibility. His son has legal issues. He's a devoted dad. He might get to the point where the only way to keep his kid out of jail is a pardon. And if he did that, he wouldn't run, I don't believe, because I think that too many voters would hold that against him. Maybe the Democratic establishment shows up and says, you keep losing to Trump, even though he keeps getting indicted, you keep losing in polls. We got to go with somebody younger, more vigorous, different, change the conversation, which for reasons I'm happy to discuss. I also don't think the Democratic establishment is willing to kind of reopen the patient, not knowing who the alternative would be. So I think we're looking at a Trump-Biden rematch. Sorry, but the good news about this new time is it's closer to drink happy hour. So
yeah, well, I've read you back, and the probability slide on this question is the one that shows the polling data for both candidates, and Biden has no competition, and Trump is crushing all of his. How many of those other Republican candidates are really just running for vice president or a cabinet position or something?
Well, let's start with, we know Mike Pence is not running to be Donald Trump's vice president. Been there, done that, didn't like how the movie ended. He wants the big job, as every vice president does. Nikki Haley's not running to be his vice president. DeSantis is not running to be his vice president. Those who have sort of criticized him, who may or may not still be in the race. My old buddy Will Hurd, he dropped out. He's a great guy, but he was not running to be the vice president. I don't know. I can't decide if Tim Scott was sort of hoping that the party would seek a less confrontational, kinder, gentler guy with an amazing personal backstory as kind of a new chapter back to a more traditional conservatism, or if he was doing that with running the option of VP. He's a very attractive potential vice president. Ramaswamy, I think, would love to be the vice president. I don't think that he's got a shot at doing that. I tend to think the vice president, the wannabe vice presidents, knowing Trump, didn't get in. A lot of the times you don't, you get into the race like a Kamala Harris, you run against the big dog, and your theory is that, you show your chops and your skills, but you don't ever draw too much blood and you get out. I think most of the people running, except for Ramaswamy, would like to be the president, think that Trump should be or might be flawed, and that maybe this is their opportunity to get in. If I had to bet my life, I've long thought South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem just felt very on brand for Trump. She's Trumpy. She's been totally supportive. She's been, the first rule of if you want to be Trump's vice president or cabinet official is you need to only say positive, flattering things, and she's stayed on that message all of the time. She's seemingly had a pretty good run. She was fairly vax skeptical and anti-government regulation. She's very attractive. All of these things feel Trumpy. Another one to maybe consider that is a little bit less obvious might be like a Senator J.D. Vance, who when he wrote his book, was not Trumpy. It seemed to kind of be playing for a different former Republican Party, and he, as a Senate candidate, was far more aligned with the rising populist wing. President Trump likes him a lot, and so I don't think Ohio is a battleground, but I think he'd be a brand fit.
On the Democratic side, you mentioned Vice President Kamala Harris. How does the Democratic establishment feel about the continuation of that whole ticket?
There is 0% chance that the vice president gets jettisoned to spend more time with her family or to take a cabinet or other Senate job. I think she's there. She wants to be there. I think the president has some personal sympathy for vice presidents. President Obama took up a lot of oxygen. And so when Biden was his vice president, plus Obama would say smooth, eloquent things, and Biden doesn't do either of those. And so I think there is some sympathy. The most important sub-constituency for the Democratic Party are African-American women, the most rock-ribbed loyal part of the base. And I think, getting rid of a woman of color as your VP would go down poorly, might cause you to lose some of the support and turnout you need. So I think the ticket we've got is the ticket you will get. The U.S., but the establishment, many are concerned that, Vice President Harris has polled poorly. Gallup has her more unpopular than popular, so underwater, larger than any other vice president they've ever polled. A lot of people say they think that's unfair for a variety of reasons. It's kind of, I have no idea what's fair or unfair. I'm just looking at the polls. But that notwithstanding, I don't see them jettisoning her. And back to Trump, it creates, if he is indeed the nominee, it creates this interesting, if he's smart, he picks somebody who is strong and well liked, and he doesn't pick someone like Carrie Lake, who would surrender a potential VP advantage. Now, real political pros tell you VPs don't always decide things. I feel like my lived experience was that Sarah Palin was not a net help for John McCain in the general election, and that Dan Quayle was not a net help for President George H.W. Bush. So if you have a VP who's polling well, it doesn't help. How much it hurts is debatable.
And Carrie Lake's running for Senate in Arizona now, right? I mean, did she take herself out because she saw that eventuality, or she really wants to be a senator?
I think she sees opportunity in the Senate race in Arizona. You have the incumbent Senator Sinema, who's now an independent. You have a Democrat, Ruben Gallego, who's going to likely be their nominee. So while Lake may or may not acknowledge, first, she doesn't acknowledge she lost. She lost. She was not as good as Senator Kelly in the race. That's why she lost. But she might not be able to get to 50. She can get to 40. And if you have the Dems and the independent, former Dem, splitting 60% of the vote, then you can win with a plurality of 40 if they each get 30, and do your math that way. So I think she'd like to be a senator. And she sees this. She wanted to be a governor. I mean, I think she, post TV, wants to be an elected official, and sees the Senate race in Arizona as the best path forward for her right now.
Just interject here for a minute, folks. I don't want to dominate the conversation. If anything we're talking about, rings your bells or so forth, please feel free to, do the little raisey handy thingy, or else I'm staring at the chat box. You can type in a chat question and we'll work it into the conversation here. You mentioned polls earlier, Bruce, and of course, I don't think anybody has a whole ton of confidence in polls today. But how much confidence do you? How have you changed the way you use polling? And the second part of that question has to do with, aren't these two presidential candidates, aren't they kind of historically unpopular if you believe the polls? Or
so like everybody, I read polls. I don't conduct polls. I have sometimes I have more confidence, sometimes less. I have a lot of confidence in the polling that says both Trump and Biden are net very unpopular. That one it feels right. The polling feels correct to me. I think if you look at the average, I like the aggregation sites that do averages of polls.
Can you submit a question?
That have been overwhelmingly accurate. The state-specific polls have had misses, and at times consequential and big misses. So ask Hillary about her polls in Wisconsin, which basically suggested she didn't need to go in 2016. Oops. But there's a little bit also of, okay, polling is definitely not perfect. We're in an age when people don't answer their landlines. We're in an age where a lot of people who, particularly Trump, the polling of support for Trump has always been below the actual support for Trump. So there's a little bit where, it's for many folks, they call them shy Trump voters, but people who didn't want to own up to it, but who did support the president. So a lot of the times you'll look at some of those polls, depends who by, and you might add a point or two, assuming there's a miss. But again, your options are you try to find polls that have a history of being accurate. You try to average those sorts of polls. You try to make sure it's not just polls from liberal organizations or conservative organizations, and you take them with a grain of salt. I'm not sure what your alternative is. The alternative is to say, I'd rather fly blind because polls aren't perfect. I don't know any measurement that's perfect. We do our best. We get the best data we can. I mean, I got a business. I run my business based upon the best information I can find, recognizing it's not perfect. It's not going to be perfect. And I need to, factor in both the margin of error and the possibility of a black swan.
You mentioned the shy Trump voter, which I think is a real factor. And in a previous answer, you talked about how, the establishment Republicans, establishment Democrats, they're the ones who I think are most put off by what's happening in our political system overall at this point. Given that it's likely a Trump-Biden rematch, do establishment people from both parties stay home, or do they hold their nose and vote against the other guy, or how do you see that playing out?
That's a great question, and you also have to factor in the possibility of third parties there too. It's as to who the vote. So maybe a few ways to think about it. First, I in one of those slides in the new deck, I tried to distinguish between what I saw as the base of a party and whether you call them the elites or the establishment, but the leaders of the party. And my observation was, looking at a CNN poll, which is consistent with others, 67% of Democratic voters and lean Democratic voters wanted someone other than President Biden. The base tends to think with their heart. So they want to fall in love with somebody, and they're not in love with Biden. Biden in 2020, he came in fourth in Iowa. He came in fifth in New Hampshire. He came in third in Nevada. He was not where the base was going. It was Bernie Sanders, which caused the elites, the leaders, the establishment within the party to say, break the glass, push the button. We'll lose. Trump is going to beat Bernie. We can't do that. And so all the other adults get out of the pool. We're going to run Biden. Mr. Clyburn, very much of a leader and part of the elite establishment within the party from South Carolina, endorsed him, helping to swing both South Carolina traditional voters as well as African-American voters. Big win for Biden in South Carolina. He carried the day. When I look at the Democratic Party today, the base would love somebody else, but we don't know who that would be. And the elites, the establishment, say we can't risk it being a Bernie or an Elizabeth Warren or an AOC or Vice President Harris. Let's keep the guy we know on the top of the ticket because he can win. For the Republicans, so the base thinks with their heart, the establishment, the elites think with their heads. Those thinking with their head in the Republican Party say, when it was about Trump, we lost the House in 2018. When it was about Trump, we lost the White House in 2020. He lost. When it was about Trump and Trump candidates, we didn't pick up the Senate in 2022, which feels like political malpractice to run Dr. Oz instead of Dave McCormick, who would have beaten Fetterman by 10. But he hadn't kissed the Trump ring. Oz did. Likewise, Herschel Walker and a variety of candidates who we had better players to run. If there weren't the Trump effect, Chris Sununu would have picked up the Senate seat in New Hampshire instead of becoming a governor for a fourth time. And so the establishment, the elites, thinking with their heads, said, let's get a different presidential candidate. Anybody else can beat Biden. The base, however, while the elites establishment ultimately seem to be calling the shots in the Democratic Party, the base calls the shots in the Republican Party, and the leaders, so-called leaders, follow the base. And the base loves how the former president he's always fighting. They love the political incorrectness. They love, the kind of the sticking it to the elite establishment that they view as kind of virtue signaling, preening, and wrong, which I get it kind of fits the heart and scratches the itch for people who feel they're on the outside. But, those in the establishment say, how about we win and we do the best we can towards an agenda, instead of having somebody who, who voices what you want, but from the wilderness because he loses again.
Which raises an interesting question. This is a question I've been struggling with, and I'd be curious your take on it. I mean, the current Biden administration, in terms of their agenda, in my estimation, is very well organized. He's got a bunch of people who believe in government clustered around him in the White House. They've got an agenda. They are pursuing that agenda. You're talking to fossil fuel people here. We know about the part of the agenda that's directed at that sector. And so I think if Biden wins, we're looking at another 4 years of finishing that agenda. My question is, if Trump wins again, is a second Trump administration going to be better organized or better prepared to actually govern this time, or are we going to see more chaos?
It's a great question. On the one hand, the last time, starting with Vice President Pence, President Trump made a lot of selections based upon people who he thought would give him more credibility, who might know how to do the job, who'd kind of been there before. I'm thinking of people like Mad Dog Mattis at the Defense Department, and I think this time President Trump has a lot more confidence in himself. He's not going to want anybody who's not a yes man, and so I think you could start with saying there won't be necessarily voices who challenge him at the cabinet table. I personally think that's a mistake. I'm more of a Lincoln-esque, team of rivals believer. As somebody who runs a business, I want partners who are strong and smart and capable. I don't want them to be jerks. But if there are 8 yes men in the room, then 7 of us aren't needed. And so to me, that's, number one, is I think he will want people he knows agree with him and understand their number one, the prime directive is agree with him, and maybe in private say something quietly, but for the most part. So I think you may lose some strength and some experience is observation one. Observation number two, particularly on the energy agenda, but I think a huge amount of what the president hopes to do is to dismantle what he would call the deep state. Unfortunately, that starts with like the FBI, that includes the national security apparatus, people who didn't back him up when, the intelligence, part of intelligence, the job of the intelligence community is to call it like they see it, not call it like you want it. And some of the biggest intelligence failures, the old, it's a slam dunk. Saddam has weapons of mass destruction. That took us into Iraq. That was wrong. I don't want a future CIA director or FBI director to think their job is to agree that whatever a president says is the way it needs to be. You take it down, on what that exactly means for fossil fuel. I certainly think they'll start with anything Biden did, anything Obama did. They will reflexively want to say they want to undo it. I think a lot of the fossil fuel and energy projects, though, are seeing meaningful investments in red districts and red states, and they may be some number of years down the road. And so I think there'll be a pretty strong effort by Congress and by a lot of folks around the country to say, don't blow everything up and say, let's reset everything 4 years. Let's look at things on a case-by-case basis. And if you find a Solyndra that went to somebody you think is, just a Dem donor, but is useless, great, blow that up. But if you find a meaningful investment in manufacturing capabilities, in the United States on something that helps us with batteries that otherwise we have to import from China, there are more considerations than merely, well, that was Biden's idea. A lot of Biden's trade ideas are Trump ideas. And to what you saw in the Biden administration is they did everything they could to rebrand them, but they're going to move things forward. They initially embraced some of Trump's immigration ideas. They then unembraced them, and we now have had a record year of migrant encounters on the southern border, and I think they're looking to figure out a political way to re-embrace some of those things.
They're starting to re-embrace them now, right? I mean, we're going to start building the wall again because the money's there and we had to do it. So That's good. We're starting to get some listener questions, but I wanted to follow up on, before I go to those, I want to follow up on one more on this transition thing if we get another Trump White House. I know the Heritage Foundation is leading an effort to get policy papers written and get potential, not talking about cabinet secretaries, but all those next 2 or 3 layers of political appointees in the department to get some qualified, interested people ready to do that. Can you handicap what you think are the chances of success for that program?
Well, to me, the single biggest question is who controls the Senate? Because a lot of those, there's the Schedule C jobs where you can just appoint people. And I think there are thousands of those jobs. Neither President Trump nor the Trump organization knows thousands of people who you can't. Omarosa was a one-off, right? There are only so many people who are contestants in The Apprentice. So people who have served Republican members of Congress or the Senate, people who have been at Republican think tanks, people who have been in industry, who haven't gone on social media and disparaged the former president, they're going to be needed. A lot of those jobs, even if you don't trust the bureaucracy, then you need political appointees to try to redirect the direction of the ship, or else the career bureaucracy is going to do that. So I think they'll be very successful at the sort of sub cabinet below political appointee level. If the Republicans hold the Senate, and if I had to bet my life, they're going to pick the Senate up this time. If they hold the Senate, it'll be easier to get people confirmed. You only need 50 plus the vice president. If they don't, it's what we saw last time is the former president has no problem having lots of acting people and lots of jobs. One challenge for people who want to see a sea change in policy is courts are more likely to throw out initiatives led by people who are supposed to be confirmed who aren't confirmed. And so if you really want to bring the power of the federal government to regulate or deregulate, you need to get people in place. To get people in place, the founders of the country in the Constitution have the Senate doing advise and consent. So you need people confirmed. And so we may see a replay a little bit of, lots of acting people trying to do things that all get blocked in courts. And, and then you're going to have nominees who can get 51, and as John McCain proved, having 49 senators have your back is not the same as having 50.
Right. A question from a listener. You mentioned the third party. Where do you see? I mean, is Robert F. Kennedy Jr. a potential spoiler for either side here, or are there other third party candidates that might come into play?
So first, we have to dispel the kind of the average American who's like, wait a minute, out of 330 million Americans, those are my two choices. Give me. And like I always say, give me Bill McRaven, Admiral McRaven, who ran all the SEAL teams when we got bin Laden. That guy's a great leader. I'd love him to be president. The system is rigged against third parties. It's super unlikely a third party nominee could get 270 electoral college votes. And if they don't, it gets kicked to the House. And I don't see the House voting for a third party. The delegations that decide who's the president aren't bound by who their state voted for, let alone a plurality in their state. So the state could have gone for a McRaven third party who got 40% in your state. But you and I are the congressman from New Hampshire, and we say we're picking Trump anyway. So it's really hard to win. It's not hard to spoil. Jill Stein spoiled, the Green Party candidate spoiled Hillary's chances in Wisconsin and Michigan and a few other states where she won by a fingernail. And Ralph Nader spoiled Al Gore in Florida by, where W ultimately won by 537 votes. It's maybe you end up with a Perot level candidate. That ain't Robert Kennedy Jr. That would be if this group No Labels gets a third party ticket to run. Now they've made the noise about like a Joe Manchin, Larry Hogan, Manchin, the West Virginia senator, Hogan, the former Maryland governor. I tend to my own belief, and I've said this to the No Labels people when they sought my opinion, is Americans are sick of politicians. So having a politician from both party neither of whom are popular enough within their own parties to win the nomination, merging them together does not turn you into a peanut butter cup. It's, a ticket like that, though, I think would definitely get double digits, but I don't think they would win. They would spoil. That ticket, the polling suggests that sort of ticket would take more from Biden than Trump. Robert Kennedy Jr. at the moment isn't on any ballots. Getting on ballots is not a cakewalk. If he's capable of getting on ballots, though, the polling at the moment, when they do the three-way polls, a bunch of national polls from reputable sources have Robert F. Kennedy Jr. between 14 and 19%, which is a lot. The only thing that I am mindful of, and if you're interested in this a lot, the group 538, that website, the political website, wrote about this maybe Monday or maybe over the weekend, but it's a very recent piece they did on Robert Kennedy and third parties. You know, John Anderson, who ran against Reagan and Carter in 1980, was polling at 21%, but he came in at like 3%. And Perot at one point was at 30-something%, and he came in at 18%. It's pretty common at this point when people are sort of disgusted. And what happens is, as the ads land and as people get more intense and as people become more afraid of the candidate they really don't like winning, they're a lot more likely to come home and to stick with the person they think who can beat the candidate they don't like. A third party vote is more frequently seen as, and more frequently is, a protest vote, which they still can run up the total percentage. I live in Maryland. How I vote doesn't matter. So I'm almost guaranteed I'm voting for a protest candidate, not Robert Kennedy Jr. in my case, because I think he's, a bit of a nut. But and probably not Dr. West either, who's a big threat for President Biden, particularly as Biden, I think, to the president's credit, stands by Israel after the Hamas terrorist attacks. But that creates a risk of younger voters of color deciding they like Dr. West more. So it's, however hard your job is, be glad you're not running a presidential campaign, because there's a lot of moving parts.
Well, and you mentioned Hamas, and the general election is just a little over a year from now, which doesn't seem that long to us, but in political terms, that's a lifetime, right? I mean, can you handicap, with what's going on in Israel suddenly today that no one expected, including the Israelis? How does that play into this election?
Well, first, the Israelis didn't expect it, but they sure should have. And I sometimes wonder if, when history is written, we're not going to conclude that Prime Minister Netanyahu took his eye off the security ball because he was so focused on the culture war fights to protect himself with the judicial reforms. And that actually has me worry about America, where we're pretty, a lot of military guys aren't getting promoted because of the fight over abortion, the culture war fight, stopping promotions in the DOD. That doesn't seem to be good on readiness. We dumped half the strategic petroleum reserve out to try to help reduce the inflation around oil to help Democratic candidates in the 2022 midterms. I kind of wish we had a full petroleum reserve now that you don't have more than just the Russia-Ukraine war, but you also have Israel-Hamas going on. A whole lot of things can happen. Historically, when the U.S. is engaged in international things, that's the country wants to rally around an American president, but if they linger too long, if it goes, the Iraq-Afghanistan wars helped President George W. Bush get reelected in 2004 and caused the Democrats to pick up the House and the Senate by 2006, when things clearly were not going as well as you might like. Unfortunately, the Ukraine-Russia war and Israel-Hamas both could go so bad so fast. It looks, from what we're reading, like the attack over last night may or may not have actually been a hit a hospital, but it was a Palestinian jihad organization whose rocket went awry. They just blamed it on the Israelis, and a lot in the media and a lot on the left are eager to embrace that story because it fits what they assume is going to happen. But there's going to be a whole lot of collateral damage from any ground operation in Gaza. I fear that Israel Hamas is going to just get worse and worse, and that's going to have huge long tail. One of the things that I observe as well is, boy, I wish we had been investing more robustly in fossil fuels as well as an energy transition. I don't know if this makes me unpopular on the show here. I'm an all of the above kind of guy.
No, it'll make you very popular on the show here. Keep going.
Well, so just as an all of the above guy, I think, I try to be honest. I am a Republican by background. I try to be honest. I think President Biden deserves credit for putting the NATO band back together after the invasion of Ukraine. I think the president deserves credit for his clear and full-throated support of Israel following the terrorist attack by Hamas. However, I think telling, claiming on the campaign trail that he was going to make Saudi a pariah regime explains why they didn't pump more fossil fuels when we needed more fossil fuels. Saying he's going to, he's telling that young lady in whatever campaign stop, look at me, look in my eyes, I'm going to end fossil fuels, would have me running a fossil fuel company saying, well, then I'm not going to do a bigger, deeper investment right now. I'll just milk some profits. So why are gas prices as high as they are? It's not all COVID. It's not all Putin. A lot of it, to be honest, is that we all overinvested in the shale revolution. So there was a market-based crash during the Trump era of, way too much supply for demand. But there's also been a thumb on the scale to make a lot of folks not invest in supply. And I'm an all of the above guy, but I sure don't see the transition fully transitioning for at least a decade, if not many. And I note I am not an expert, so you may tell me it's 5 decades, or maybe somebody will tell me it's 1, but I'll take the over if somebody tells me it's less than a decade.
We're in the over category here. As James Carville famously said, it's the economy, stupid. I mean, how does that play into the election? And I also want your opinion, with as many people dissatisfied with home interest rates at highs we haven't seen in 24 years, and a lot of people feeling like they're not doing as well as they were before. Who was the bonehead that told Biden to lean into Bidenomics as a campaign slogan? How is the economy going to play into this election?
So it's a great question. Of course, I as somebody who I think has been reading and receiving the things that I publish quarterly, which are free to anybody who listens to this podcast. They're musings, take them or leave them, and your money back guarantee because they're free. But as you may recall, I looked at the economic metrics heading into the 2022 midterm, and I contrasted it with the previous 10 midterms, and every one of them was worse. So that had me pretty confident there was going to be a pretty big Republican wave, which I, on multiple of my quarterly analyses pointed out, it's the economy, stupid. How does this not help the R's? But that was offset by the fact that some number of voters looked at a Herschel Walker or looked at a Dr. Oz and said, I'm concerned about the economy, but I don't see these knuckleheads as people who are the answer to it. So you still have to run pretty competent, capable candidates. This time in Pennsylvania, McCormick looks like he's going to get the nod. He's a very competent, capable candidate. So if the R's can run candidates like that, the economy may be more helpful. Now, the economy itself, a lot of the things that one might look at right now sure look like a soft landing. It's interesting that the Democrats are 20 points under the Republicans in, who do you trust more on the economy, when everything I think I see suggests that we may be at a high watermark for the Dems on the economy. And it, maybe the Fed deserves more credit, maybe not, but the rate of inflation is certainly coming down. So that's good. The stock market has been, surprisingly robust, notwithstanding a whole lot of geopolitical and other potential external shocks. So that's pretty good. Unemployment continues to be really low. I mean, the jobs numbers are awesome. I think it's next week we get the next GDP, but the GDP now forecast by the Atlanta Fed says 5% growth, which is bat bonkers. So, there's a whole lot yet. Nobody's giving them credit for it. People feel bad about it. And a lot of people seem to think that we've got a recession coming up. Now, everybody said we had a recession coming up this year. So I've successfully called 10 of the last 2 recessions. So who the hell, don't take my word for this stuff. But it's hard to imagine the economy gets even better. And there's 1,000 ways it could get worse. And for a lot of voters, it's less the inflation rate and more, hey, stuff costs a ton more today than it costs in when Biden took office. Maybe that's Biden's fault, maybe not. Larry Summers would say that the $1.9 trillion stimulus thing was gasoline on the inflation fire, but there are other things going on there too. Usually the president is held accountable for how people feel, and people don't feel good. Confidence is not where it needs to be. Prices are definitely up. You pointed out correctly that houses feel unaffordable. And we could very well be looking at a recession in the next 12 months. But again, you ought to have guests on who know those things. I'm not one of them.
And are we a little premature even asking that question? Are people looking at how they feel and what the gas price is at the pump 2 weeks before the election next November? Is that?
Yeah, I've spent a stupid amount of time for a history major who likes to use spreadsheets trying to find the magic bullet. So is it unemployment rate? I spent a bunch of time trying to look at the momentum of the unemployment rate. Maybe it's not how high or low it is, but whether it's moving up or moving down. It's just really hard to find hard correlations. 2022 really blew and screwed up all of the desire to find good correlations, because you had an economy for a Republican wave, but you had candidates for a Democratic hold in the Senate, and a overperformance of expectations for the Democrats in the House, even though they ultimately lost. They should have lost 3 times as many seats, but a combination of abortion is an issue, a combination of election deniers, and the perception that dangerous candidates were being run is ultimately what turned a lot of voters into deciding, I've had enough crap in the last 2 years with the pandemic and the murder of George Floyd and all the riots that followed. I view it as sort of a flight to safety. In the same way as you buy T-bills, give me the incumbents, give me the candidates I already know. That was the first election in 2022 where every incumbent senator got reelected since 1914.
Wow. Let's turn our attention to Congress for the time we've got left. You already handicapped that you think the Senate's going to flip back to the Republicans. That's a function of the fact that the Democrats are facing a pretty brutal map to defend this year, right?
Yep. Yeah, look, it's West Virginia. You guys would know better than I. I get Manchin's never lost a race, but he's up against the governor. He's double digits down. Trump is ahead by 30 to 40 points in the state. I don't see how. And Manchin, it feels like his numbers fell through the floor after his machinations on the Inflation Reduction Act. So I think that's an R pickup. That moves it to 50-50. The R's only need one more net. I don't see the Republicans losing Texas or Florida, which are the only remotely sort of kind of vulnerable states, but not really for the Republicans, which means all they got to do is pick up Arizona, we talked about, where it may be a 3-way race. Montana's a Trump by double digits, although the senator there, the incumbent's tough. Ohio's a Trump +8 state, but Sherrod Brown in Ohio is super tough. So just like Tester, he's a battle-tested guy. The R's are going to need to get a really great candidate against them. The Casey family have been elected officials in Pennsylvania for a long time. Senator Casey will be tough, but Dave McCormick's as good as it gets. A whole lot of West Point grad, a ton of business success, a lot of government service, both in the Gulf War and in the Bush administration. I mean, he's central casting. So that'll be really tough. It feels like the R's will find at least net one in all of the other potential races, given they're only on offense.
Right. And now to the House. I could ask this question 100 different ways, but
what a show. Well, a colleague and I, a Democratic partner and I, were speaking to a group in New York yesterday while they were voting. So literally when they asked him a question, he's like, hold on, let me look at Twitter. And he's like, okay. So, literally Jordan just went down, and we had begun saying it feels like Jordan may have the votes. Start with the chaos of the speakership. I have no idea. I'm pretty confident. Well, I know for a fact, Mr. Jordan didn't win today. Looks like he's not planning to give up.
He lost ground on today's vote.
He lost some ground. His theory is he hopes that he can cajole, badger, bully, and threaten the people who aren't voting for him by, Fox News and other channels into deciding that their own political future demands, bending the knee. I just don't think that's going to, the problem is he doesn't have enough margin. He can't lose more. He can't lose 5 or more. And I think there's 5 or more who are going to say no for a variety of reasons.
Yeah, don't you have 5 or more who are in arguably
right
districts?
But the Republicans having a majority but unable to agree as a majority on who can even lead them doesn't help the Republicans hold the House. The desire to move, which Mr. Jordan really does, but move impeachment forward, figuring you'll come up with a rationale for impeachment during the investigation of impeachment, is maybe you will, you might. There's certainly, you know, some potential leads there, but absent more, just like all the Benghazi hearings, that doesn't help with suburban voters. Abortion is net positive for the Dems. It's a 60-40 issue. The Dems are on the 60% side of that issue. And redistricting, more than anything else, will cause the Democrats to pick up 3 to 5 seats merely by the fixing the districts that the Supreme Court said were unconstitutional. So those are all helping the Democrats. On the Republican side, concern about the border is very bad for the Democrats. Republicans may ultimately force the Dems to do some policies that help a little bit, so maybe that helps. But, you know, even blue state mayors are upset about the state of the border, so that helps the Republicans. Concerns about crime and you know, and how the defund the police movement caused less policing of crime, that helps Republicans net. Concerns that Democrats prioritize the teachers unions over parents when it comes to K-12 schools. That's an issue that helps Republicans. We've talked about the price of things and things costing more as a result of inflation. That helps Republicans. So there are tailwinds for both. Redistricting is a structural tailwind, so that's even more powerful. That brings it to close to even. But then I take a look, there are 18 Republicans who are defending districts that Joe Biden carried. And there are 5 Democrats trying to defend districts that Trump carried. I net it out, and it makes me feel like that if I had to bet my life right now, the Dems pick up the House, but boy, is it skinny, is it thin, and 1,000 things between now and the election could alter it. So in our report, we called it too close to call, because it really is too close to call. But, you know, if you're asking me to snap right now, right today, I don't think the Republicans in the House today are showing themselves in glory in a way that people think, let's give those guys another 2 years to run the place.
All right. Folks, we got 2 minutes. So if you've got another question for Bruce, fire it off in the chat thing or raise your hand right now. So your assessment at this point in the game is Senate flips to Republicans, possibly narrowly. House maybe flips back to Democrats, certainly narrowly. And the White House, a toss-up?
Well, look, it's last time it was 42,922 votes that if you changed would have meant a tie in the Electoral College, which would have meant Donald Trump was president. It was crazy close last time. It'll be crazy close this time. It'll come down to maybe 8 states that matter, and they're going to be really tight. Obviously, I said my head tells me, for the reasons I explained, it'll be a rematch. My gut tells me there's going to be a plot twist in this story. I don't know what it is, but, you know, it's just maybe we're going to have the rematch nobody wants. Maybe there's just no exit ramp. Maybe that's where we go. And if so, like the last time, it'll be super close. You know, it means there'll be recounts. People will be alleging deep fake, you know, AI deep fakes and everything you see. So people won't trust what they see and read. People won't trust that the results the morning of are the final results, because we'll still be counting. We'll probably have recounts. People can't trust that Russia and China and others haven't attempted to, you know, they've never been able to change the vote totals, but they make Americans mistrustful of other Americans. So it will be that much more negative. The thing, I hate to end as the super bummer, John, but the thing that I'm most concerned about when I think about the 2024 election is the fact that we don't have any trusted referees. You know, ultimately, you had the Supreme Court make their ruling, and to his credit, Vice President Gore said, look, the Supreme Court has ruled in 2000. We're at a time right now when Democrats don't trust anything on Fox. Republicans don't trust anything on MSNBC or the mainstream media. Democrats don't trust the Supreme Court. Republicans don't trust the FBI. If you have a super close election, you have things going to courts. You know, if people aren't going to accept the results, that's very unhealthy for America. It's unhealthy if you're running a business. It's unhealthy if you're, you know, if you would like some greater predictability in policy. It's unhealthy if you want to be able to come to Washington and make the case about, you know, why whatever it is you think matters to your workers and to others. You know, so I think we're at a dangerous time, and we're at an unhealthy place in the body politic. I am hopeful in the medium long term that we will go through a series of reforms that fix things. You know, people who read history know things were really bad in the 70s and things were really bad in the Gilded Age. And in each case in the 70s, we had the Reagan Revolution, and we got our confidence back, and we trusted things a lot more again than we did. Same with the progressive era after the Gilded Age, saw a lot of reforms that fixed things. I think we're in one of those periods. They're just messy, and in the short term, they're high risk.
And I blame Zuckerberg, but that's a topic for a different webinar. Bruce has a whole slide deck on the Gilded Age that is in my top 10. So thank you, Bruce, for taking the time out of your busy schedule. I know you're a busy guy. It's awful nice of you to spend time with us. If anybody would like me to send them, my Bruce Mehlman best hits album, shoot me an email, wardo@wardo.com. You can sign up to be, if you don't want to wait and have to read the On Track closely to see when the new quarterly slide decks come out, you can subscribe with Bruce. He'll send you the slide decks directly. They're incredibly informative, not just for the political insights that we were talking about today, but also he does a great job of relating how that should matter to people who run businesses and things you should consider for, how a business can navigate what's going on in this crazy world right now. So thank you again, Bruce. Very, very much appreciate you spending time with us today. And remind everybody, we'll be back to our 11:30 time next month with a nice conversation with Frank Wilner, who's one of the smartest railroad analysts that the planet has. So thank you, everybody, for being here. Thank you, Bruce. We'll see you next month.
Thank you, Wardo. Thank you, Melinda.
Take care.